Welcome!
Over the past couple years, I've been getting more into comic books and have had a great time so far. However, I haven't read much of the more bigger titles from the likes of DC, Marvel, and Image just due to how much being out there for them all, as it can seem a bit daunting at times. Of course, as a longtime fan of manga, I got a little curious and decided to see what the world of manga had to offer for these iconic characters. And there's quite a bit out there, both old and new, so I decided to make a video showing some of my findings, ranging from Batman, the Justice League, Deadpool, Spider-Man, and even Spawn. To start things off, we'll take a look at some of the DC manga. Really, most of what I have here is just Batman related, but when looking at most of the things DC itself puts out, it makes sense. There was a neat Wonder Woman one-shot for the Wonder Woman 1984 movie, but it's just way too short to have a proper spot on this video. Superman has a few manga, one of them apparently being about him just chowing down on Japanese food, but sadly, at least to my knowledge, none of those have been translated into English yet as of this video. However, Batman has seen quite a bit of adaptations in Japan, whether it be in anime or manga form, with Batman getting his manga debut in 1966's Batman manga, otherwise known as the Bat Manga, written by Jiro Kuwata, best known for the classic 8-Man. The Bat Manga is pretty simple, with Batman and Robin fighting a villain for a few chapters and then switching over to a new one after that. It's standard superhero fun one would expect from Batman during this era, less dark and brooding and more fun and adventurous, though not as campy as the Adam West TV show at the time. Interestingly enough, as I'm not sure if it was either a licensing or creative decision here, there isn't a lot shown of familiar faces of other Batman supporting characters and villains. Commissioner Gordon, Vicky Vale, and Alfred show up in a few chapters, but their presence isn't as pronounced as you would expect. With I'm pretty sure the only chapter where Alfred has a more prominent role here features him dying trying to save Batman and Robin, only to be resurrected by a scientist, who just takes his body from the graveyard, but his revival has him turn into some psychic mutant called the Outsider that wants to kill Batman and Robin. Though don't worry, it gets resolved and everything goes back to normal. In terms of villains, besides Clayface, oddly enough, all the villains here are original characters. The villains Batman goes up against here are pretty diverse, with most of them coming from supernatural or sci-fi based origins, giving us the likes of Lord Deathman, a man who's already dead, the Human Ball, who is pretty self-explanatory, Professor Gorilla, a gorilla with Batman's intelligence, all sorts of aliens and monsters, and the Arab, a circus performer who dresses up like an Arab man to commit crimes. Oh fuck, oh no. While I did enjoy going through the Bat manga and seeing all the new enemies Batman goes up against, I did find it to be just a bit average, with it just being 3 volumes of Silver Age Batman on episodic adventures. Still, the Bat manga is an interesting piece of both Batman and manga history that should at least be given a look, and hopefully the original Superman manga can get the same treatment. Next up, we have One Operation Joker, a Joker-focused manga where during one of their normal bouts, Batman falls into a vat of chemicals, which turns him into a baby. While at first Joker obviously finds this all hilarious, he slowly starts to realize this is one of the worst things that ever happened to him, as without Batman he just can't have any fun. So he decides to whip up Operation Joker, in which he will raise baby Batman, who he eventually, by coincidence, names Bruce, to become the Dark Knight once again. However, as you can imagine, the Joker doesn't know much about parenting, though not wanting to lose his greatest rival forever, he starts learning. And with a concept like that, you know this manga is going to be hilarious. Seeing the Joker apply baby Bruce for nursery school, or legitimately being worried about bringing a baby carriage on a busy train, is just inherently funny. Over time, Joker winds up being a super protective and supporting parent, going as far as to remove his makeup at times or call off entire heists if he feels like baby Bruce is not doing so good. Joker gets some support from his main henchmen Johnny Frost and Harley Quinn, but he's just so overprotective of the baby, especially with the more hyper Harley, he mainly does most of the work himself. The Way of the Household Joker. On top of the over-the-top parenting, the manga also gets a lot of its humor through callbacks from other Batman media, like Joker dancing on some very familiar stairs, or the chapter when Bruce takes his first step, being titled The Dark Knight Rises. And whenever Joker gets pissed off about the struggles of parenting, he blames good old society. I just love how this manga takes these iconic characters and puts them into a very unexpected and genuinely funny story. It's super refreshing, and I'm surprised this one hasn't been licensed in English yet, as I feel a lot of people would get a genuine kick out of it. I read the series mostly through scans, and things do seem to be heating up slightly, as with the absence of Batman and Bruce Wayne, many people are curious and worried. However, none more so than Alfred, who's taking it rather hard. Under circumstances, he winds up coming across baby Bruce and starts getting a very familiar vibe from him, which I can imagine will lead to a lot of great moments. Though the series has sadly not been updated in quite some time. Still, if you want a more comedic take on the relationship between Batman and the Joker, this manga is well worth checking out. And with that, we're on to our last DC manga in this video, which, surprise surprise, is another Bat manga, with Batman and the Justice League, which I find to be a strange title given that Batman is a founding member of the Justice League. But anyways, this manga starts off with Ryu Amamiya, a teen who traveled to Gotham from Japan in order to investigate the whereabouts of his missing parents. However, Gotham is extra dangerous lately as criminals have been hopped up on Gaia Juice, a substance being given all over town from the Joker that makes criminals even more aggressive. However, bigger things are brewing in the criminal underworld. The Injustice League have assembled and are also joined by a pair of Japanese mystics they hope will guide them to magic ley lines so they can harness their power. And it seems those Japanese mystics are connected to Ryu. While Batman tries to handle it all himself at first, it seems that this case requires the help of the Justice League. Though, don't get too excited as this is still a Batman-focused manga, as it takes a while for most of the League to even show up. Like, seriously, it takes 3 volumes for a portion of them to come into action, except for Flash and Cyborg, in this 4-volume long series. So I can imagine they aren't going to be doing much here. While this manga is officially released in English, the last volume, for whatever reason, hasn't come out yet, as Volume 3 came out in English around 2019, so I'm guessing this manga didn't sell too well and we just never got the final volume in English. The manga itself is alright, while it's neat to see a bunch of DC characters in manga form, and it's a shame a lot of the characters aren't utilized more as these designs are solid. Well, maybe except the Joker here. Batman's first appearance is appropriately menacing and a good start for the manga. The thing is though, the story itself feels like the most standard thing you could tell with these characters, just with a slight Japanese flair. You know, the bad guys team up to get their hands on something powerful and the Justice League have to stop them. Considering how many times I've experienced this exact premise and many other forms of media with these characters, this manga version isn't really doing much for me. Which is a bit of a sour note to leave DC on in this video. However, moving on to Marvel, I do feel the 3 Marvel manga I've selected to talk about are all pretty good. First up is Deadpool Samurai, which going into I was a bit worried about, as Deadpool to me is a character that's pretty hit or miss. I like the movies and really enjoy Joe Kelly's run with the character, but other appearances of Deadpool I've seen run a bit more on the obnoxious side. Luckily though, Deadpool Samurai was a hit for me. In this manga, Deadpool is recruited by the Avengers to join the Samurai Squad in Japan to stop Loki's latest evil plot, where he's paired up with a young and fiery Sakura Spider, and eventually an idol who's been somehow paired with Venom. While this manga has a good dose of superhero action, to me it's much more of a comedy series, with all the hilarity one can expect from the Merc with a Mouth. Deadpool's wild personality leads to a lot of funny gags that are nicely balanced thanks to Sakura Spider, keeping things a bit more grounded, or at least attempt to. Of course, there are plenty of fourth wall breaks with Deadpool tearing and inking through pages, rewinding through panels, and trying to tone down his violence and attitude due to knowing that he's in a Jump Plus manga. Though that can be tough for Deadpool with a lot of the enemy encounters here being resolved with them being shot in the face. The realization of being in a Jump Plus manga also brings on a lot of references and parodies, though one of the more surprising ones here being for Fire Punch, a series I thought I'd never see parodied, much less in a Marvel manga. And while that was cool, the absolute greatest one here is when Thanos comes in. Proving to be a difficult threat, Deadpool calls for a pen pal of his to help out, and it's none other than All Might. And this isn't just a one-panel thing, he sticks around for a while and just one-shots Thanos, meaning we wouldn't even need an endgame if Infinity War just had All Might. Honestly, Deadpool Samurai seems like the best type of manga for Deadpool. You can tell series writer Sanshiro Kasama is a big Deadpool fan of how the manga both understands and utilizes the character, making it great for both Marvel and manga fans. And moving on, we have Spider-Man Fake Red, which follows the shy and nerdy Yu, who one day comes across a Spider-Man costume in an alley. Thinking that it's just that, he takes it home and plays around with it, without washing it, which come on dude, that's disgusting. However, Yu quickly finds out that the costume is the real thing. Well, as a Spider-Man fan, this is an amazing find for Yu. However, it seems like the actual Spider-Man is nowhere to be found. Yu quickly finds himself in a web of lies when one day on a roof taking pictures of himself in the costume, citizens start to call out to him to help out with a nearby fire, and he winds up helping out. With Yu now taking on the responsibilities of Spider-Man, or at least until he can figure out what happened to the real one, which is definitely a wild decision to make as Yu isn't superpowered, with his only abilities being that he's somewhat good at rock climbing and has access to Spider-Man's web shooters, which forces Yu to come up with some unorthodox ways to try and save the day. One of my favorite is just him getting on a taxi to catch up with criminals. Of course, there's only so much you can do like this, which is why he's lucky that he's eventually helped out by Silk, who's also been looking for the real Spider-Man. However, as dangerous as it is, she lets Yu keep on being Spider-Man, in order to not cause problems that would arise if the truth came out. As a Spider-Man story, this manga works really great, as Yu, just like Peter Parker, has to balance both his normal teenage life and newfound hero life. The action and heroics are even more tense due to Yu having to put on a facade, and of course you have the mystery of Peter Parker's whereabouts lingering throughout the series. The art here is spectacular, perfectly capturing the comic book art style, injected with a bit more manga stylings. The designs are amazing and the color pages are an absolute treat. However, the only downside of this manga is that it was sadly cut short. While it thankfully doesn't just abruptly end, the story very quickly wraps up. Personally, I still think the ending is fine as it reaches the conclusion you would want from this series, while also featuring some of the manga's biggest encounters up to that point. But the overall story still feels like it just needed a volume or two to properly flesh things out. It's unfortunate as I feel this manga had a lot going for it. Honestly, I could imagine this story working out amazing for a movie. However, we still have another Spider manga to cover, being the original Spider-Man manga, simply known as Spider-Man. This 70s manga may be the wildest and most unique take on Spider-Man I've ever experienced. Sure, some people may think that would be the Toei Spider-Man series, and sure, Spider-Man has a mech there, but it's really just a Showa-era tokusatsu series that happens to star Spider-Man. Meanwhile, the original Spider-Man manga is a whole different beast, and is easily the most interesting manga we're covering in this video. The manga stars another lead named Yu, only this Yu is actually Spider-Man. Very much like Peter Parker, Yu is a nerdy kid who one day is bitten by a spider and gains superpowers, eventually leading him to become the beloved web crawler. However, this Yu's Spider-Man journey is way more dark and so much more depressing. I mean, right off the bat, in Spider-Man's hero debut here fighting against Electro, he winds up killing him with one punch. While that's crazy enough, it also turns out that Electro here was also his love interest's brother. And practically every villain Spidey goes up against here either dies by his hands, leaves him with a lot of trauma, or just, both, causing you to give up the mantle of Spider-Man quite a few times throughout the series. Now, early into the manga, despite its darker tone, it tries being more in line with American Spider-Man with familiar faces and villains. There's Aunt May and Jonah J. Jameson-like characters, and the first handful of villains are familiar, like the Lizard and Mysterio. However, quickly the manga starts going into completely original material, in which it truly takes off and just goes in completely wild directions. No more costume villains, now Spider-Man's villains are either straight up paranormal or more heavily crime focused. As soon, Spider-Man is going up against ghosts, witches, women who control psychic murder tigers, an American war veteran with a hatred toward Japanese people who hijacks an airplane, and a group of delinquents who try framing you for sexual assault. And these are just the people you fight, as emotionally there's a whole other battlefield there. Feelings of doubt, regret, and self-hatred constantly bombard you throughout the manga. He struggles if being Spider-Man is even worth it, while occasionally going on insane power trips. Yu absolutely goes through the ringer here, almost as if the spider bite had damned him to a life of despair. Some chapters barely even show Spider-Man till the end, focusing more on Yu just trying to keep it all together. While the comics have done some insane things to Spider-Man over the years, this manga I feel takes things to a whole new level. I mean, where else would you see Spider-Man smoke weed, going crazy in horny hallucinations, and play with his web shooter, if you know what I mean? This is a Spider-Man we'll likely never see again, but it's seriously fascinating, and while it does have content which may be a bit too much for some, if you can handle it, it's definitely something worth checking out. And while that may be our last Marvel manga for this video, it isn't our last one yet, as now we will be quickly switching over to Image Comics with the Spawn manga, Shadows of Spawn. Now, Spawn is one of the most successful indie superheroes around, and as someone that loves his monster superheroes, it should be a series I'm all over. And really, I've tried. I read a few volumes of the comics years ago, and it just didn't connect with me outside of the cool art. And last year I watched the animated series, and I still couldn't get into it, which is agonizing on my part, because whenever I look at Spawn, it just looks like something I should be into. So I was hoping this manga might do something to help out a bit, and it kinda did. While we know the Spawn of New York, Al Simmons, Shadows of Spawn follows the Spawn of LA, Ken Kurosawa, apparently taking place around the same time as the comics. Ken is a martial artist street thug with a heart of gold in trying his best to take care of his little sister. However, one day he dies and becomes the latest Hellspawn to serve under the great demon Malebolgia. Ken barely recalls his past life, but over time starts stringing together memories of his past life and his little sister. Though now he must focus more on the various demonic threats that appear before him as Spawn. Now, unlike the original Spawn that has a lot more focus on the drama of Al Simmons' past life, as well as a lot more crime elements at the start, Shadows of Spawn immediately goes for the supernatural action, with this Spawn ripping and tearing through various demons. So kind of what I wanted from Spawn in the first place. Spawn here also gets some power-up forms throughout, so that's pretty neat. However, this more action-focused approach does cost the character department a bit, as the only character to latch onto here is Ken, and while we do get glimpses of his past, it's not enough to get really attached to his character, making this manga just 3 volumes of action, which, while fun, isn't exactly enough to make a super compelling story. And the story we did have here is to never be concluded, as this manga was also axed. If I were to compare Shadows of Spawn to something, it's that it's very much like a 90s OVA, or at least one of the lesser iconic ones. It's violent, light on story, features cool action, crazy monsters, and hot women that make for an entertaining experience, but beyond that, doesn't offer much else. So once again with Spawn, I find it all really cool, but have no stronger feelings outside of that. Maybe one day I'll give it a proper chance again. But for now, those are some manga adaptations of American superheroes. I'd love to do another video like this in the future, as it is interesting to see these iconic characters in new styles and interpretations. I might even do an anime version of this video one day. But for now, in my next video, while still on the subject of superheroes, we're going to be taking a look at tokusatsu and tokusatsu inspired comic books. And with that, it's time to wrap up. I hope you enjoyed this video, and in the comment section down below, tell me which one of these manga adaptations seemed the most interesting to you. As always, I'm Mr. Falcon Punch, stay safe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.